Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. As part of our continuing programming on the reintegration of our veterans into civilian life, today on Another View, we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. As one veteran recently told us, hardcore soldiers see PTSD as a weakness. But we now know that it is not a weakness, but a very real psychological and physical response to the damages of war. So what are the symptoms of PTSD? How is it treated? Where can you get help? And what about the effects of PTSD on family and friends? We'll answer your questions about PTSD. Stay tuned for Another View right after this news from NPR.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Just want to say a very special thank you to Lisa Godley, producer and substitute host, and to Victor Bowen, who held down the fort while I had some very, very well-needed and well-deserved time off. So I'm really happy to be back with you all back in the chair today. You know, Hampton Roads is home to 108,000 active duty military personnel, and 178,000 veterans live here. And that number is expected to rise as the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq come to an end. Our veterans need services to help them regain their footing as civilians, and WHRO WHRV is doing its part to help. Today's Another View is a part of a multi-year WHRO Veterans Initiative to engage the community to help support veterans as they transition to civilian life in Hampton Roads. To find out more about this initiative, please visit whro.org/veterans. Today, we're going to talk about a consequence of war. It was officially recognized after the Vietnam War, but veterans and their families from all wars have dealt with it. We're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. 1 in 3 African-American Vietnam vets have PTSD, and Black women in combat zones in Iraq and Afghanistan have higher rates of PTSD due to assaults that were never reported. Joining me to talk about PTSD and its effect on life after the military is Ryan Douglas, a veteran who served as an Army Scout for 5 years during the Iraq and Afghan conflicts. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. Sidney Lee, who is National President of the African American Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Association, and he's joining us by phone. Hi, Sidney. How are you?
I'm great, and you?
Great, so good. Thank you so much for joining us. And also Robin Renee Thompson, who is a certified service officer for disabled veterans, who also joins us by phone. How are you, Robin?
I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you all so much for being here. So all 3 of you are veterans. All 3 of you, if I'm not mistaken, suffer or have had effects of PTSD. So I'd like to start out by just kind of hearing your stories and how you recognized this disorder. I'm going to start with you, Ryan. What was going on? After you came home, you served in the Army 5 years. You were up front on the front lines. Is that correct? As a scout?
In this conflict, there really are no lines. You just go wherever they tell you. This is a little bit before most people started paying attention to PTSD and it's probably something we should take care of. And it's not a bad thing, but in any combat unit, weakness really isn't one of those things that is liked or tolerated much. So you do whatever you have to not be weak. And this being before all the education about PTSD, we really didn't know much about it. So if you hear, somebody had to go to mental health or somebody had PTSD or whatever, and you just kind of shrug it off like, they just couldn't hack it.
So, okay, so it's kind of a macho thing that you had to be strong and you had to not give in to the feelings that you may have been experiencing.
Well, in a combat situation, in a combat unit, in a combat zone, yeah, you do. It's not so much about being macho as it is you compartmentalize stuff and you deal with it later.
So you deal with it while you're actually in the service, but then when you come home, and you're out now, and you're a veteran, and things start happening. Tell us about your experience.
I had other issues. I'm also diagnosed bipolar.
Okay.
So I had that, and I went into the VA because some friends of mine had convinced me to go get help and checked out and get my stuff straight and everything. And so I did, and the can't call him a shrink.
Counselor?
The counselor,
Okay.
yes. The counselor, he was looking at me, and he was asking me questions, and he was like, has anybody ever talked to you about PTSD? And I was like, I mean, I've heard about it. We got the briefing in the Army, but, nobody really told me much about it.
So if your friends convinced you to go, what were they noticing? What were you doing? Or what was happening to you?
Small stuff. You hear a car backfire or a door slam, and you just kind of jump and you look.
Things of that nature.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Okay. Sidney, you served in the Vietnam War, correct?
And then I did 2 tours.
Did 2 tours in there. Now,
Much respect.
So when you came home, tell us about how you discovered or determined that you had PTSD, and how did you get involved in this whole movement to educate people about it?
Well, it was a little different then,
Okay.
and it took quite a while for me to notice it. When I first came back, it was about 15 years later that I did, because one of the things is that, being an airborne ranger, I was still doing the same things originally that I had done overseas and in Vietnam. Therefore, it wasn't affecting me. It was only when I totally separated from military services that I began to notice the difference. And it was primarily because, in some way, the mind has, it has different compartments, and it can lock things away. Normally, when you have a stressful situation or something horrific happens, or you become ill or age come into play, then it'll release those boxes that it had locked. And this is one of the reasons why veterans who suffer from PTSD, unless it is so severe that it is immediate, can function for years and years later, without it affecting them to such a place or such a status that they have to get medical treatment.
So, Sidney, but tell us, what was going on in your life that because you said 15 years later. So what was the behavior or what was happening that made you say, you know what, I need to take a different look at this and see what's going on?
My family. The people around me, to them it was normal because we were all basically doing the same things. But when you begin to notice changes in your children, changes in your spouse, changes in the people that are closest to you that does not have an association with the military. And if they knew you before and they have not spent a considerable amount of time around military people, then they notice the changes in that little odd things that you would do, the avoidance of certain types of conversations, maybe drinking a little bit more, being argumentative, having problems with your relationships, being hyper-venal and hyper-alert, just the hostility that you just displayed, having problems sleeping at night.
Well, now I can
those
imagine
were basically
with you serving in the Vietnam War and the troubles that Vietnam vets faced when they came back to America. That whole issue, the whole idea then of saying, well, we're also suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, probably was not something that you really wanted to admit to.
I'm going to say yes and no to that because it was a little bit different in that PTSD really was not recognized until the mid-'90s. Up until then, they were still, classifying it as other things, failure to adjust, schizophrenia, and, even the VA hospitals, they weren't treating you as such. they would say that, you have other problems, you have other issues. You're doing, different things because you choose to, not because of an illness. Whereas, veterans would go to alcohol and drugs as a way of trying to relieve the tension that, they would feel. Because when you consume these things or ingest them or inject them, then it sort of, takes you away from everything for a short period of time. However, when, it's gone, then you're right back to where you began. And it was really difficult getting treatments for it until the 90s. And it was in 1994 when they came up with the word PTSD, and that was a way of disguising it. Because if you're in the military, depending upon the type of duties or the types of work you had or the clearance that you had, you couldn't acknowledge it, because if you did, then there was a chance of you losing your clearance or, the job that you may have held. So you pretty much sucked it up and kept on going.
Robin, I want to bring you into the conversation also, because you also served in the military, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Tell us your experience.
Well, my experience was a little different. I was more of a Desert Storm era, and during that time, like you said, it was in the 90s, around 1992, and during that time, post-traumatic stress disorder wasn't really being recognized, especially in females, although we were experiencing military sexual trauma and assault at that time. First, I would like to state, commend the men that's coming on, the veterans, and sharing their experience, because PTSD is a reaction to any type of trauma, not just the war, violent acts, rape, natural disasters, any traumatic event that can be experienced by almost anyone. But when dealing with military sexual trauma, which is my situation, there are two main concerns. And one of the concerns is intervention and treatment. And as a female, that's something that we don't openly disclose. So many females slip through the cracks, and they're not identified because, for one, PTSD is an invisible scar, an invisible wound. It's not something that you can just approach someone and be like, oh, they have it. Like one of the veterans stated, usually a family member or your coworkers or someone close to you recognize it. In my instance, I was sexually assaulted in the military, and it caused me to have all type of dysfunctional behaviors within my life. I can say that I've experienced homelessness, drugs, alcohol, and it took a minute. It took about 5-6 years before I actually went to a veterans hospital or was receiving help. It took my mother to find me, and it took, like you said, a family member, because when you're dealing with PTSD, a lot of times you suppress those feelings. You suppress them and you live with the depression, but then the negative behaviors associated with alcohol, drugs, sexuality, spirituality, all these things come into effect until you are able to get that help. And I would tell any veteran that's out there that it takes a lot of self-determination to have changes within your life once you acknowledge that you have these issues. And the first thing is to seek counseling, and that was the change for me in my life. I started going to the VA Medical, Veterans Administration, to the Hampton VA Medical Center. And through the domicile where they have for homeless veterans, I was eventually picked up in a program called Veterans Homeward Bound, where you get to go to school. And after, receiving education and treatment and intervention, I was able to eventually turn my life around and go further and to overcome some of the obstacles.
So, Robin, let me ask you this, because I don't mean to interrupt you, but when you were going through all of these changes, being homeless and so forth, did you as a person inside say, did it ever connect for you that it might be PTSD that was causing this, or that this was a result of why your life was changing like this?
I thought that I was losing my mind at that time, because I was young. I was in my early 20s. Well, not early. I was like 27. I had my marriage had failed. I was out of the military. They basically just put me out with 20% because I was injured, out in the field due to the incident that happened in the field. Mm-hmm. So I think that at the time I thought that I was being punished for, some of the things. And when you're dealing with PTSD, one of the symptoms is paranoid. You have a startle reaction, and you feel guilty because you survived and others didn't. And when I was there in Desert Storm, I've seen vehicles blown up. I haven't seen the bodies in them, but just the reaction of knowing that, some of my comrades did not come home. I felt like it should have been me, and I didn't associate the military sexual trauma with my feelings. I had this place, like one of the veterans say, you kind of like go into denial. Your mind tends to make you think something different. But once I got into a program called Response for women that's been raped, that's when it came to my attention that I was regressing and bringing back some of the pain from the military. Oh. And this is like 7 years later because I was angry. I wasn't so much angry because of just that, but because of my whole situation. And I could not, I could understand why I kept having recurring nightmares because I had put that behind me. I tried to ignore that had ever happened. But I couldn't do it because the behaviors, the anger, the irritability, the nervousness, just the problems of feeling good about myself just wasn't there. So when this lady, the counselor, started to talk with me, she said, Robin, draw a picture and show me what it is that you feel. And when I drew the picture, I had like pins coming out of my face with red eyes. And she said, Robin, this is anger. And she said, you're angry. She said, you have so much anger. And then that right there started my therapeutic process because I wanted to know. And in order to know why I was so angry, I had to express, I had to share what was taking place in my life.
And not internalize it as
right. I had to internalize what had happened. And I was just angry that, the guy that did what he did to me, he was demoted to E1. I was promoted from an E1 to E3. I was basically, this happened in Fort Bliss, Texas. I didn't know anyone. I'm from Virginia, and they took me off of the base and put me on off-base housing. And pretty much they just like covered it up. I was told I couldn't go outside my chain of command, so I had to hold a lot in. And then I had to maintain, and then I was supposed to be there for 2 years. Within 10 months, I got orders to leave. Before I left, he was back at E4, and I was still at E3.
So there were a lot of issues that were going on in terms of that, and all of that added to your anger. Sidney, I want to ask you a quick question because Robin mentioned several different symptoms of PTSD. Can you just kind of concisely tell us, for those who may not be aware of what the symptoms are, what is PTSD?
Sure. There are 16 different symptoms, and the first is the startled reactions to noise or sudden movements. The second is relieving, you relive any traumatic memories. Then hostile or suicidal feelings and impulses. Profound grief as a reaction, or no emotion is shown, when there should be normal feelings that should be shown for some problems or sympathy in some way or another. Problems with intimacy and impersonal relationships. Avoidance of certain people's movies, topics that are related to traumatic events. You're hyper alert to threats to yourself and to loved ones. Sleep problems such as dreams and nightmares. Excessive need to control outcomes. Guilt, depression, or lack of emotion. Concentration and memory problems. Anniversary reactions to those traumatic events that you may have experienced. Alcohol and substance abuse, anxiety and hyperarousal, employment difficulties, and of course, finally, problems with authority figures.
So when you're diagnosed, then do you have to have, is there a formula, I guess I'm asking, in terms of the mixture of things that are happening to you, or can it just be one out of that list and you still would be considered to have PTSD?
Well, as a
Yes.
Wait a minute. Let me get Robin. Go ahead, and then I'll come to you, Sidney.
As a certified service officer, we have a criteria that we go by, and it determines your percentage. Usually the National Service Officers, they use a book that's called the CFR 38, and within that, it discusses the DMS 4 manual on mental health disorders, and usually you'll fit a criteria. One of the things that he mentioned, I didn't hear, was isolation and alienation. A lot of people that have PTSD are loners. They'll walk off, they'll wander off. I believe that in order to fit that criteria to be rated at a 50%, it has to affect your socializing, your family, your employment, and just your daily living. If it's more severe than that, then it goes into your personal hygiene and things of that nature.
Okay. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call. Join our conversation. We're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder and ways to deal with it, treat it, and how to help family members to help our veterans. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Ryan, the isolation, was that one of your issues?
With me, it's kind of difficult because a lot of that stuff I do on my own anyway. I've always been, and I can be in a group of people and then I'm okay, but I've always been kind of a to myself kind of guy, and I've always been argumentative. Some of these things I've always been. So when it came to me, it was kind of difficult to pin it down. With me, and I know a lot of my guys were like this as well, if it was just us about anything in particular, didn't really care much. But if it affected somebody else or somebody that we were close to, then we took an interest and we were like, all right, we need to, what's the mission? We got to figure this out. And so when it came to me, about a year after I got out and I had moved back to Virginia, I started dating a girl I went to high school with, and she was noticing things. She was in the Army as well, but she started noticing things. And after we met back up and we moved in together, and she was noticing some things when I slept and daily interactions and stuff. And she kept telling me, you need to go, you need to go, you need to go. And I didn't go for me. I went for her.
Oh, okay.
And so when I went, I was just like, all right, whatever, dude. Can we get this over with? And he started saying some things, and I was just like, wow, okay, that actually makes sense.
So it started making sense to you at that point. Sidney, you're the president of the African American Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Association. And when I heard about the group, it struck me, or I'm curious as to, is there a difference in terms of the way that PTSD affects African Americans versus other races of people who have served?
Yes, there is. And according to all of the studies that have been performed, it's more likely that when PTSD, I should say when an African American has PTSD, the chances are about 22% that they will have it for a lifetime. And as opposed to in other nationalities, the percentage there is a lot lighter. And the reason for that, they say, is because of the background or the environments that most African Americans or minorities have lived prior to coming into military services.
So the social things that were going on within the country, racism, lack of employment, all of those types of things, poverty and so forth, also play a role in terms of what happens if you develop PTSD on top of that. Is that right?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So does your organization work with everyone or just African Americans?
Oh, no. We're accredited by Congress and the Department of Veterans Affairs. So we're prohibited from discriminating. We work with any and everyone who has a claim, not just for PTSD, but for any of the issues that they may have concerning military services.
Okay. If you're just joining us, we're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, with Army veteran Ryan Douglas, Sidney Lee, National President of the African American Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Association, and Robin Renee Thompson, Certified Service Officer for Disabled Veterans. So and I throw this out to any of you, if you are a family member and say, for example, you see the veteran in your life asleep, and maybe they might be having nightmares, or maybe they might be fighting in their sleep and so forth. What should you do? Should you wake them up? Should you talk to, what should you do, Ryan?
I know with me, don't touch me while I'm asleep, because you're probably going to get hit or kicked or
because you're
something.
Still reacting as if you were still in
like whatever's going on in my head while I'm asleep, I'll ride it out. I know I've never like hit anybody that was sleeping next to me. Like you hear that a lot, that's never happened to me, but I've been told that I was talking like I was on the radio. I've been talking like I was trying to call for fire or something else, or call a medevac or something, whatever the case may be. I've been told that I jumped up in the middle of like out of whatever was going on, and just jumped up and just sat there for a few minutes, like not knowing where I was. And it does get.
I mean, I can imagine it's pretty scary for your spouse or your significant other.
Yeah, it is.
When you're sitting up there, all of a sudden, out of your sleep. So, what do you advise them to do? I mean, do you just let you ride it out? For me,
I can only speak to myself, but for me, I gotta just let me ride it out. And some people can be woken up, but it's not a really advisable course of action. If they're thrashing around, if they're having a nightmare or something, like trying to wake somebody up out of that, it's not a good idea. But
Robin, let me ask you the same question. What do you say in terms of a family member who may be going through that? That's one example of waking up, but there may be some other things, some other behaviors that your natural inclination is to do something to try to bring the person out of that. What do you suggest? Or how do you counsel?
Well, as far as sleep, I know when I used to have nightmares or experience, flashbacks and things of that nature, the reaction for females is, are you okay? You're crying in your sleep or whatever it is. But I can say, and I just want to put this out there because I'm not, this is my perspective, that there's approximately 1.8 million women veterans and 8% that may have some type of PTSD or military sexual trauma. It may not, that number don't seem like a lot according to the National Alliance for Military, NAMI. They stated this as far as issues in treatment. But when you look at the overall proportion of females, that's a large number, and I'm sure we all experience our symptoms differently. But my thing is awareness. And that's why, as the Department of State chair for the Disabled American Veterans, I campaign awareness. And I say keep seeking advice on the veterans who sacrifice. We have been putting out pins since 2012 about awareness, because that is the key thing, and that is what's going to help the percentage that's still out there. And you'd be surprised the growing number of homeless. And how do you approach a homeless veteran and talk about PTSD without offending them, especially if they're in their zone, meaning if they're in the alienation mode or they're in a guarded mode. You don't want to add any more trauma to that person, So the best approach is to come as a comrade. That's what I think. I think veterans relate to veterans, and at first I didn't understand that, but it's so true because we're all in the trenches together. So there's a commonality. So when you meet a veteran, the first thing I say is, hello, my name is Robin White. I'm a disabled veteran, and then that opens up doors like, oh, really? I served in the Marines and da-da-da-da. So I try to bring about a commonality. I try to come as a non-threat. And then from there, I try to see where that veteran is.
Got you. Sidney, we have a question from Facebook. They want to know, how do you differentiate the symptoms between PTSD and other mental health issues?
Okay. Well, with PTSD, typically, when you're being evaluated, if you have any three of the symptoms, then your medical advisors are supposed to refer you to a mental health person.
Mm-hmm.
And to evaluate that any differently from that, first of all, you have to understand that if you have PTSD, then you're going to have a variety of other illnesses. So then you're going to need medical assistance to have them determine whether or not these symptoms are secondary to, the primary cause, which then in itself would be PTSD.
So you do suffer, a lot of times people have other ailments that go along with the PTSD.
Okay. You can probably heart problems, headaches, hypertension, neuropathy, all of these and many others come in addition to the PTSD that you're suffering from.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically the severity of it. And if I might just throw this in, if you're around a veteran who is going through the symptoms that you earlier described, it's best to just let them be. Don't try to touch them. Don't try to wake them out of it, because most times it's a violent episode, and then you're into it. And when you might attempt to protect yourself because of their reactions, then them not being within themselves, it will be confrontational.
Definitely.
So it's best, and then later sit and have a conversation with them.
After it's over.
Yeah.
So we talk about the veteran getting counseling and getting help. What about the family members? I mean, should everybody go together? Should there be a family thing, or does the vet have to kind of get themselves together first? Because I'm sure this has an impact
it definitely
on family
does.
life. Go ahead, Ryan.
It has a huge impact on family life. My son, I can't take him to see fireworks. He's only one, but I can't take my kid to see fireworks
because you can't be around.
The last time I tried to go see fireworks, I ended up running down the street or running down the beach, screaming my head off.
Wow.
So I can't take my kid to see fireworks. A lot of stuff that my dad did with me, I can't do with my kid. When he was a few months old, his mom was really hesitant to let him sleep in the bed with us. And I'm like, I only get to see my son, every now and then. I want him next to me while I sleep. And, because she knew sometimes how I slept, understandably so, she wasn't very keen on the notion. Nothing happened. It was all good. But it affects families as well. And I know it caused conflict in my family with me and my dad particularly, but with the family in general, because you do isolate yourself and you are hostile and defensive a lot of times, unnecessarily so. The biggest thing I can say on the family side is read,
become knowledgeable about it.
Talk to somebody, just talk to somebody. If you know somebody that knows somebody, talk to them. Be like, hey, my kid's a little messed up right now. What can I do, or what do I need to know? Or my brother, or my sister, husband, wife, whatever the case may be. That awareness and understanding is probably the biggest thing that can help, because a lot of times we just need to know that somebody's there. You don't have to say anything, do anything, but you're there and you understand a little bit about it. So that helps more than anybody can ever know.
Robin, you're a counselor. What do you counsel families as well as the veteran?
Yes, I do. And I think that family counseling is very important, because a lot of times I believe the spouses and the children, they don't understand. And I find that to be so, because these are my own siblings. When I was going through what I was going through, they could not understand, why are you so guarded? Why do you feel so defensive? And they just don't understand the nightmares, the trouble sleeping, the nervousness. I don't like going to this day. I don't like going to, like, large public places where it's just a whole lot of people. I don't like darkness, certain movie theaters. I'm not comfortable in them, and you have to explain what PTSD really is. And then I believe once you educate them and give them a little more knowledge about it, then they are more empathetic to what it is that the veteran is experiencing. And believe it or not, very few walk away from that. Some of them become a part of the Disabled American Veterans Auxiliary. These are men and women. I've had husbands join the auxiliary to support veterans because they never knew the severity of PTSD. One husband could not understand the issues with his wife. Like, why is it always on her terms? And then once he started coming and attending the classes, he was like unbelievable. It really pretty much saved their marriage because, if you don't have knowledge of what is going on and you think you can deal with it, it's not easy. Some are very heavily medicated, others aren't. Some take it from a therapeutic approach. They go to DBT training and, they go and see a counselor, once every other month or whatever their treatment is. So I think that the family needs to be a part of that. And they do have a program with NAMI, not only for the veterans, but also for the family on Wednesdays in Hampton. And I highly recommend, the ones that come, because usually the veteran, when they're going through, they usually don't want their family members with them when they're confiding and sharing what it is that they're experiencing. Usually they talk to me as a counselor, and they don't mind me speaking with their spouses and stuff, and then they'll come together. But it's never like, oh, I want to pour my story out and I want my spouse with me. I've very seldom seen that, but it can happen, and it does happen at times. But yes, the family needs to be impacted. The family needs to know what the related issues to that trauma is and how to deal with it.
Okay, 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Nick joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Nick. You're on the air.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I just basically wanted to put a quick plug out for a friend of mine, Lieutenant Daryl Dipsey. He's an African-American himself, but he has PTSD and created a phenomenal application to be loaded up on your phone. It's called the Emotional Vitality Assistant. And basically it's made to create a secure interface between members of the military there with PTSD and counselors, basically on through either text or video chat. And I'll take additional comments here off the air.
Okay, thank you so much for that call. Sidney, besides the mental health counseling, what other ways are PTSD or is PTSD treated?
It's treated in a number of ways, depending upon whether or not it's a combat vet. If it's a person who served in combat, then they have, we call them vet centers, or veteran centers. And any veteran who has combat time, he and the family members can receive treatment through them. Now, it is done individually, of course. The families is a group, however, the veterans separately. They can also get treatment to most of the states have a Department of Veterans Affairs, and their Department of Veterans Affairs have outside counselors because a lot of individuals prefer not to receive treatment through the VA hospitals. So,
is that still a part of that whole idea of not having that on your record? Is that why they don't want to go to the VA hospital?
Yes, a lot of them don't, primarily because they don't want to be stigmatized. Additionally, a lot of veterans feel that at the VA, they don't have adequate, well, I should say efficient number of doctors that can provide them individualized treatment when they need it. Most times at your VA centers, they put them in a group, and most of the groups are overcrowded. Groups should not have more than 12 to 15 members. A lot of these have 18 to 20, and they only do it, I'm going to say, once a week. There's a facilitator with one counselor in it, and if it's only for an hour, sometimes 2 hours, by the time it goes around with 15 members, each member or each veteran only has maybe 5 minutes at the most, to express themselves, and that's not enough time to talk about problems that you may be having. So basically, the group has a topic that they're going to follow for that week.
I want to ask. Go ahead.
You're supposed to get into it. So this is why they would prefer the outside treatment.
I want to ask each of you, too, because we all know that particularly in the African-American community, there is this reluctance to seek mental health treatment. Because there's still that stigma, as you said, Sidney, that we're okay, or you can pray it away, or other reasons. Do you think that that's part of the issue? And I'll start with you, Ryan, in terms of African American servicemen in particular going to get help for PTSD rather than trying to just deal with it on their own.
It is. It's that, in the fact of. There's a misconception that because you have it, I'm rated 100% PTSD, okay? I have 30 offices across the United States, and I'm constantly on the road, talking about PTSD. So the misconception is that if you go in and you talk to someone about it, you're going to be medicated to such a state that you're going to be walking around like a zombie, which is not true. It's up to you, the veteran, or any person who is receiving the treatment for it, to talk about the medications that you're taking and how they're affecting you. They're supposed to help, not hinder. And a lot of individuals are of the assumption that if it's known, then it's going to affect, your employment. I can't get a job. I'm going to get fired. If your PTSD or the medications that you're taking for them affect you, so greatly that you can no longer become employed, then the VA does have recourses for that, and it's called unemployability, which then rates you at the 100% rate. You can also collect your Social Security disability. And between the two of those, most individuals are going to be bringing home more money than they make from employment anyhow. So the stigma is that it's going to hinder me and I can't care for my family, which is not true, because then your family will have your medical, dental, educational benefits to include the ID cards and the others that they had on military services. So in most cases, it's more beneficial because then you receive the treatment, and most importantly, your children will, because they will definitely emulate your actions and activities. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to have a form of PTSD. And the misconception is that you can only, it's only acquired from combat. It's not. It's from anyone who's experienced any type of horrific experience or life-threatening experience. And this is why the name was changed to PTSD, Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Association, and that was done to eliminate the stigma of a person having a mental disorder or having something that's incurable.
Robin, there's a question from Facebook. They want to know, why don't more women report the sexual abuse in the service?
Like I stated earlier, many of the females are slipping through the cracks because they don't see it as They don't see it as a criteria for receiving services. For one, it's invisible. Mm-hmm. If they were to be hit by IUD, or they were to have a traumatic brain injury or something visible scar, if they were to be shot, then they will be at the VA hospital. But being that it is a psychological issue, a lot of them don't seek it, and that's why I state, and my recommendation is individual counseling, mm-hmm. Sexual trauma counseling. And that's something that they don't. That's not something that someone is proud of. If someone of a superior is putting his hands on you or violating you, And there's so many incidents of it that it's really sad. I say take advantage of the readjustment counseling services as well. And there's a 30-day PTSD program in Winston-Salem for females. They started that program a few months back. I know a lot of people don't want to go, but I recommend that you go to this 30-day program in Winston-Salem, because not only will it give you the entitlements and you'll receive that PTSD rating that you deserve, but also you'll seek the treatment that you deserve.
Okay.
And as for myself, in slipping through the cracks, had I known to journal and to write, and I recommend that to a lot of female veterans, to journal and write, because through journaling and writing, I was able to account a lot of the feelings that I held. And in order to do that, it has to come from a strength perspective. Absolutely. And I'll tell anyone, to this day, I try my best. And if you go on my website, Staff Consultants, you could see a lot about PTSD for women veterans. And I'll say this in closing.
Yeah, because we're almost out of time, Robin.
Okay.
We're just about out of time. Go ahead.
And I'm just going to say this. They served and they deserve the best care.
Absolutely.
Ready or not. Thank you.
We will put your information and also the places that you recommended on our website, so our producer will get that information from you. I just want to first of all say to each of you, thank you so much for your service. That's first and foremost. Secondly, one last thing, Sidney, that you would say to veterans, like in 10 seconds. What would you say to a veteran who's having some issues? Sidney? I guess he's not there anymore. Ryan, what would you say? Very quickly.
Keep your head up.
Keep your head up and go get help.
Always have your buddies back. Okay. Always watch your six.
All righty. Thank you all so very much for your service. Thank you for being on Another View today, and we will be right back.
Nelson Mandela, Nelson Mandela, Nelson Mandela, how
And Another View would like to take a moment to remember former South African President Nelson Mandela on the anniversary of his birth today. Nelson Mandela helped bring an end to apartheid and was a global advocate for human rights. During the 1940s, he was a leader of both peaceful protests and armed resistance in a racially divided South Africa. He was imprisoned for nearly 3 decades and released to become South Africa's first black president. After retiring from politics in 1999, he remained a champion for peace and social justice around the world. Nelson Mandela passed away in December of last year at the age of 95. So we just wanted to recognize him today. So she won an Emmy, a Golden Globe, and 4 NAACP Image Awards, just to name a few. I'm talking about Epatha Merkerson. And if the name doesn't jump out at you, maybe you'll recognize her TV name because she played the role of Lieutenant Anita Van Buren on the hit television series Law and Order for 17 years. She recently spoke to our Lisa Godley about her passions, which include educating the masses about type 2 diabetes.
She appeared in more episodes of Law and Order than any other cast member, 391 shows to be exact, before calling it quits. In this clip from Season 8, Lieutenant Anita Van Buren puts an attorney and FBI profiler in their place.
I'd like you to meet Mr. John Law from Los Angeles. He's formerly with the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit. He's a profiler.
John Law. That'd be your real name?
Mr. Law has studied the case, and he's prepared a profile of the suspect.
I suggest deep background checks on former nannies, housekeepers.
My detectives are already on that.
I also suggest releasing a statement that you are close to identifying the offender. This strategy has proved successful.
Why don't we just let Mr. Drake leak it to the media?
I resent that.
I'm sure you do.
But after 17 seasons, Epatha Merkerson left the show on May 24th of 2010, which was also Law & Order's final episode. With her departure, she took the record for the most appearances by an actress on a single series. Merkerson started her acting career performing in off-Broadway plays, which would take her to a regular TV series role as Reba the Mail Lady on Pee-wee's Playhouse. That was followed by a series of guest spots on various shows until landing the role of Lieutenant Van Buren on Law and Order. Over the years, she's had a variety of roles in both feature films and movies. Her career was going great. Then one day, while making a guest appearance at a health fair in Washington, D.C., she had her blood sugar tested. And in her words, it was over the roof.
So, I was there as a celebrity, quote, unquote, and I found out quite by accident. So it was shocking, to say the least.
Her diagnosis would change how she lived for the rest of her life.
Sometimes you have those early morning calls, and so, I always want to make sure that I test my blood sugar in the morning. And, during the day as you're working, sometimes your levels go down, so I always make sure I have some juice around, and I try to eat properly because, you can get very tired in those long days. And so the changes I made were lifestyle changes, diet, and trying to exercise. But mainly it's just being careful of your food intake and what it is you're eating.
Today, speaking about diabetes and pushing diabetes education is her passion.
This is why it's exciting for me to team up with Merck and the American Diabetes Challenge, because we want people to know their A1C, and what we're asking people to do is to talk to their doctor, is to set a goal and to reach that A1C number, because half of the people, and there are over 26 million people with diabetes, are not at their A1C goal. And if you see what your goal is, it will allow you to manage your blood sugar levels.
She says diabetes has not only impacted her life, but the lives of several family members.
My dad died from complications of diabetes. My grandma went blind, so I have an uncle who's had amputations. The risk factors of not being proactive in your health care are astronomical, as we all know. But it's important to know that if you're proactive, that you can maintain a healthy lifestyle with type 2 diabetes. It's in our hands, really.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
And as you all know, Law & Order, my absolute favorite show on the planet. So that was very exciting. I'm glad, Lisa, you had an opportunity to do that interview. And that's our show for today. If you'd like to hear it again or share it with a friend, please visit our website, anotherviewradio.org, and download the podcast. And while you're there, you can sign up for our eView newsletter, a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. And be sure to like us on Facebook. Next week, cardiologist Dr. Keith Newby joins us for Another View on Health. We'll talk about health issues unique to the summer season. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Victor Bowen is our audio engineer. And Alicia Washington answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Thanks for listening, everybody. And let's get together again next Friday at noon for Another View.